All right. Well, third time's the charm, right? We tried to do this twice before, but I have very, 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 very solid internet this time, so I have absolute full expectation of the work. The only thing I would ask is save questions towards for the end, just because that way I can time myself better and make sure I get everything the way it's supposed to be. So, without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started here. I'm looking at my timer here. So as you know, I'm Dave, W7UUU. I was in office in 74, general in 75, and got my extra back in 97. So been a ham for a long time. Come on, change. There we go. So the program is Shack Fire and Rebirth. This is about the fire I had in my shack, of course, and the lessons learned about how that all happened. With the concepts and approach for a modern shack. So it's kind of a design your ideal shack. And I thought it would be a good time to show some of the things that I did that if you ever have a chance to do a complete shack redo, you'll be able to maybe incorporate some of these ideas. So what we will cover is the shack before the fire on October 25th, 2020. The fire itself, the cause, and the immediate aftermath of it, then the clean out and the starting of the redesign. I'll show you a little software tool that I came up with for doing the redesigning. Layout considerations for building out a space if you're ever in that position to do so. Safety, power, and cabling considerations that all come into building a new shack and then the completion and final layout as it is today. So from the basically from fire and ashes to a complete rebirth of the shack. So where we're talking about, this is a drone view of my property, and the shack building is actually a 3-car garage, of which 2 bays are my shack. And the house is at the 7 o'clock position. My tower is about at the 11 o'clock position. So that kind of gives you the lay of the land. Before the fire view, it was a pretty rustic garage. It wasn't sheetrocked, so we did all of that and put in a ceiling because that wasn't sheetrocked. And you know, just a concrete floor with a big rug laid on it, but it was cozy and I really liked it. It was a very nice shack. Another view from over in the corner, kind of seeing out where you can see on all the parts bins and all that, and the boat anchor radios and the library, and another view where you can see the main operating position off to the left there, all lit up. The Heath kits, then the SB 301, 401, and SB 101 stations, plus the old novice rigs on the right. So it was pretty nice station. I was especially proud of and really enjoyed my fully restored 301, 401 Para on the top and the SB 101 on the bottom. It was just a wonderful restoration project to put all that together. And I had other old hybrid radios and other Heath kits, and all on a patch bay, and I could rotate them in and out. So always rotating radios into the station. It was also like a general purpose room for wife and I to hang out and watch a football game or watch a movie out in the garage, bring the doggy out. And then the main operating position was, all patch bay based so that I could rotate radios in and out all the time and play with them, play with different radios from different eras. Had a lot of fun doing that. Still do. But this was the station, of course, before, and a little workbench in the back corner that was adequate for the purpose, not anything fancy, just kind of what you'd expect. And just to the left of that, up above, was my museum row. Those were all radios that I had fully restored, top to bottom. They were 100% operational and just part of the arsenal of radios that I would rotate through. You can see the giant blown up poster that I made of the special event station certificate for the K1T 70 years of Heath kit that I did back in 2017. Just another shot of the 301, 401, and SB 101 lineup. Really like that station. Another view of the main operating position, and just kind of showing how stuff got rotated through over time, and it was just constantly in flux. So it was a very enjoyable station. I had a lot of fun out there, a lot of memories, and a lot of stuff from many years, up until Sunday, October 25th, 2020. And the interesting thing is I know exactly when the fire started because I had just finished the CQ Worldwide Sideband contest. And just as a little gag I was going to do on QRZ and post that, I was going to take another screenshot at right after 5 and show, we go from all these signals in the band to nothing right after contest. So I took a picture 2 minutes before the contest, or 2 seconds before the contest ended. But I realized that on the big screen TV that the World Series was still playing. The Seahawks weren't playing yet, and they were supposed to be doing pregame at this point. And my wife had said, it's on Fox. That's the channel. So to prove to her that it wasn't Seahawks, it was still the World Series. I took this picture, which ends up being pivotal in this presentation because I ran into the house to say, "Look, I'm showing you right here. This is the World Series. This isn't the Seahawks." So in this picture, you'll notice there's white boxes behind the TV. And the most important part to notice is over to the left of the wood stove, which had nothing to do with the fire. There's a power cord, white power cord hanging down, and that will all become pivotal. Ran into the house. Wife said, "Oh no, it's on this channel. It's not on that channel. Sorry." And here's some finger food snacks we'll take out to the radio room and watch the game. And in that amount of time, we're talking maybe 3 or 4 minutes, looked out the window, and that's what we saw. Smoke was pouring out of the rafters, and about 8 minutes after that, we had 5 fire trucks. There's no fire hydrants in our area, so they had to bring in 5 trucks to have water. Very large crew on staff to put it all out, so they worked very, very quickly. And the big thing they did was to cut a giant hole in the roof without messing up the rafters, and then stuffed 3 hoses into the hole in the roof, which then fills the sheetrock ceiling with water. And once it weighs enough, the whole thing just collapses, and it dumps 50,000 gallons of really nasty lake water mixed with fire retardant on the fire. It does put it out very quickly, but the water damage and chemical damage is enormous. The lighting in these pictures is actually from the fire trucks. So this is 6:15. It's not even an hour after the fire, and it's already out, and everything is pretty much destroyed. This was we called it a kitchen. It wasn't really, but it was where we would have food prep and stuff for having people over for game day and things like that. That was the third bay of the garage, and it was all pretty destroyed. And through the whole thing, the wood stove was never the cause of the problem, and to its credit, it just kept on doing its job. And the fire chief is standing there. He's the guy in the brown pants, and he's just looking at the wood stove, thinking, is that the cause? And I finally said, "Look, can we get somebody to put that fire out? We don't want any more fire in the room tonight." So that was not the cause of the fire. But the next morning is when we really started to see the effect of everything that had happened and the destruction level. And there was literally about 80,000 gallons of water dumped all over everything. Everything in the room was completely drenched in fire retardant water. And this is the location where the big screen was. It's the big black blob in the middle, and you can see by the blue book there that what just 24 hours before was our big screen in the man cave, so to speak, and where it had sat. Just another look across the room. It's not so much direct fire damage in every area, but it's so much water was dumped into the space that so much was destroyed, and the heat levels were enormous. You can see where the fluorescent light fixtures created the long streaks of melted plastic hanging down from the ceiling because it was about 800 degrees in the room for about 20 minutes. And just another view back where we were with the sofa and the big screen, and looking back over towards the main operating position. This picture shows the moment where the water collapsed out through the sheetrock ceiling. So that was the point where the some 60,000 gallons of water that were in the attic broke through and dumped the water into the room. And then they followed up with hoses and sprayed everything. So the whole room was hosed down. So a lot of the fire damage was fairly centralized and concentrated, and that's where stuff was completely destroyed, as in, turned to charcoal. But the damage was still very extreme. Then the next day, this is the fire inspector that came, the investigator that came probably 2 days later, actually, after the fire. And he immediately went to this corner of the room, right behind where the TV was. And the reason for it is he saw this. And if you know anything about how fires tend to spread and how fire investigators look for the cause, I didn't know this. I learned a lot from this event. They're looking for that pattern. They're looking for that V shape that indicates a source of ignition. And where the bottom of the V is, where the elbow of the bend is, almost always is the source of that particular cause of ignition. And that's where they start looking first. And the location of that, where that red arrow is just about at the red arrow in the inset picture there. So it's right behind where that TV had been sitting. And the thing that caught his eye in just minutes on the scene, once he saw that V shape, he spotted that cord that you saw in the earlier photo. He spotted that cord and started pulling it up. And what he found at the end turned out to be the cause of the fire. And it's a device that most people probably have at least 5 of in their home, if not 50. It's a cheap plastic surge suppression power strip. And the fire burned a little hole in the side of it from a device that's internal to these cheap suppressors. That's called a metal oxide varistor, or an MOV, which is a surge suppression device, but it has a nasty habit that it has a failure mode that can cause the MOV to not only get hot enough to catch on fire without blowing the circuit breaker, but it actually ejects the fire out with pressure. It shoots out. And you go on YouTube, you can find videos of MOVs that are actually spraying fire like they're a little butane lighter, and it blasts a hole right through the plastic. So if you have any power strips like that, get rid of them. We'll be talking more about that as we move through. But that is the cause of fire, was that cheap plastic power strip that I'd been packing around for years. So then the clean out begins. That's me in my pseudo hazmat suit. It was very nasty in there. You couldn't breathe without a full blown respirator. It was really awful. And it was 2 weeks before they would let me start going into clean out. So all of that gunk and ooze and rot, and all the dead mice, because there were obviously mice that were involved. The whole place just absolutely reeked. So we had to just start digging in, get in wheelbarrows, had a couple friends over, and just started hauling the stuff out, and making piles of things that had to be sorted for insurance photos, and things that needed to be kept by the insurance company's request for verification if they needed it, and then stuff that obviously was garbage that just went into the dumpster. The most heartbreaking part for me was seeing this as this pile grew and grew and grew, of all of the radios that were bringing out of the fire zone and stacking. And they're in various states of being destroyed. And a lot of them, it's really obvious to see. I mean, you look at these and, yeah, that's been in a fire. I recognize that. That rotator controller was brand new. That was for a VHF antenna, and I had just installed that Yaesu rotator about 2 weeks before. And that's all really obvious damage. But what a lot of people don't realize, and I got a lot of comments at the time, was they would see something like my SB401 transmitter, and they'd say, "Well, that looks totally fixable. We can fix that." But you have to remember that inside that transmitter, even after 2 weeks, and I took it out, I poured out about a half a gallon of nasty chemical lake water from the fire. And what it does is it instantly rusts everything that's rustable, and the circuit board traces on the bottom, everything would be just completely corroded from that. And the odds of a successful restoration are going to be very, very low. So it's not savable. Most of those radios, only things like tubes that in big items that could be pulled out could be saved. But this got us to where we had a complete clean slate, and starting to see the bright side of it. And so this is where the whole focus of the presentation shifts to, okay, we've got a whole big space here. What are we going to do with this 3-car garage? And so I'm starting to get ideas of how it's all going to go together. I have lots of time to think about this. First order of business was to plastic coat all of the wood. The rafters were saved, other than a couple of sets of rafters had to be replaced, but the walls were saved. It was only the contents really that were truly destroyed. So we had to do the coating on it to keep the smoke, smell, ooze from. It would never go away if we hadn't done that. That kept it from being a ever-present chemical smell in the shack. So one of the first things I found is this neat little program that you can get on Amazon for 15 bucks called Sweet Home 3D. And it's a uber easy to use CAD program that has almost no learning curve. It's so intuitive that just about anybody can launch it and almost immediately be able to start laying out designs for a space. The library of objects they have is generic and weird, but it allows you to pull up objects that are roughly the size of what you're going to need and place them into a space and start actually figuring out how you're going to design your space. And you've got a whole library of these various items and stuff that you can put in and start figuring out how your room is going to shake out. You can spin it around in circles and look at it from every angle and elevations. You can put in windows and skylights. You can put in all the doors. So you can really see, is this going to work ergonomically? And it's a great program. It's 15 bucks. So that's kind of a nice little tip there. It's called Sweet Home 3D Design Software. And it was a great investment in developing this project and moving forward with it. So once I had my design all laid out, we got out into the real world and made it match up. And so pulled the car into the garage because we're now going to use that third bay that used to be the kitchen. We're going to use for a actual car garage. And I started laying out the wall according to the drawings. And by gosh, it worked out perfectly. Right where it was in the drawing and where it ended up being in reality. And to this day, it absolutely fits perfectly and meets everything that we needed for dividing the space into the two separate spaces. Got all of our windows in place and installed out front. Got rid of one roll-up door, turned it into a second man door. So there's 2 ways now out of the room. There's 2 separate doors out. And then the center one is the garage door for the car. And then we put a matching door for the carport so it didn't look so junky. So another cool tip, if you're doing cables from your tower or from your antenna farm, whatever that may be, and you want to get them into the shack and look neat, there's an electrical gizmo called an LB. That's the letter L hyphen letter B. And it's just a big right angle box. They're about 38 bucks at Home Depot or at an electrical supply. And it's a great way to bring a pretty significant amount of coax cables and whatever else you're bringing in and be able to drop them down the wall. And I just added a little 3-foot stub pipe extension on it to be able to bring my cables in. So that was one of the neat little tricks that I came up with for bringing the cables in. And you'll see it when they're all in later slides. Another thing that I highly recommend, again, I had a lot of time to think this through. All this is all being rebuilt. I had nothing to do. So I spent a lot of time figuring out how this is going to work. But if you find all of the gizmos that you're going to populate a space with, if you find their pictures online on websites, you can find their specs. And so you can find out exactly how wide and how tall they are. And if you know that, you can then scale the screen captures of the images and make them be exactly proportionate. So you can actually come in and lay out where everything's going to go because you know how big it is. So there's no guessing. And this was a huge bonus for me in planning what gear I wanted to acquire to replace the dead gear with the insurance claim, and to move forward. And on the boat anchor side, same thing with the 75A4. Those dimensions are all very well known. So I was able to play around with placements. It didn't end up being the exact way that it is, but it gave me a great insight into where stuff can go, how much stuff can I put in here, what do I really want to do, as I redesign this shack in a completely new way. So I can't more highly recommend, if you're going to do a shack redo, is to put it on paper. Then you can, on computer, you can slide the images around and move stuff around and figure out where you can place it without ever having to lift a single box. Another one of the big lessons that I learned from this is obviously no power strips. And since I did have the luxury, now the next segment of this does have to do with the luxury of having the studs all open, and I'm going to sheetrock. But there were no limits placed on me for outlets and circuits. They just said, tell us what you want. And so I actually have 58 outlets divided over, I think, 7 circuits into the radio room. And it just makes it so that we have outlets every possible location, except for a few that I forgot. So other than that, I've got outlets almost everywhere that I could possibly need them. And we even did it visually rather than use the little symbols that electricians want to see on the wall. We did those too, but I also printed out little pictures of outlets so my wife could also walk through and she could visualize it without having to translate little electrician schematic symbols drawn on the studs. You could actually see what is going to go here and try to picture cords running around. So this is just a view of the team of electricians in there doing all their things and getting all the bazillions of outlets installed and all the new circuits. Another thing that I realized was that things like data cables, security camera cables, phone cables, don't really use that, but and sound system, entertainment stuff, that cable is cheap and it's very easy to install yourself. And so I ran zillions of cables in this space, and put wires on every single wall that all interconnect. And we'll see some of that as we go along as well. And also, if you're doing a design like this, think about where things are going to go. I knew that I was going to want to have a geochron display on the wall, and so I planned for that ahead of time by putting a backing board. You can kind of see there a couple extra 2x4 studs that are screwed into place to give me the backing. So it's good to think about that stuff. Then you're not trying to figure out when the sheetrock's up, how am I going to anchor this mount to the wall. And then, of course, where the big screen TV as well, figuring out, well, I know it's going to go somewhere in that general area. We'll think about the bracing for it. It's a big item, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know how big it was going to be or how much it was going to weigh. So I just went crazy with some 2x10s and just screwed them liberally into the stud spaces to give me a very solid backing behind the sheetrock for the later edition of what ended up being a 75-inch TV from Walmart and a stereo system using some stereo gear that I already had in the house. So there's the pre-planning, figuring it out, and then the reality of putting it in, and it worked out exactly as I had designed it by making sure that I had the cable routings where they needed to go to reach the equipment. Another thing that if you're doing this kind of a project that you really should avoid is make sure that you're staying perpendicular to power lines with your signal lines. So all my data cables, they cross perpendicular if they have to be in the same space as AC lines, and you're not getting induced noise from the power lines. You're minimizing that and keeping your 18-inch spacing from power lines and parallel runs of data lines will go a long ways to help keep that AC noise from getting into your systems. I'd never owned an amplifier before. I have one now, but I didn't think I was going to want an amp again. It just wasn't something that's ever been in my culture. But I figured, what the heck, it's less than $6. So I ended up putting three 20 amp, 240 volt outlets in series parallel. They're all on the same breaker set, but now I can move an amplifier to any of three locations. So it's a cheap thing to add, even if you never want an amplifier. If you don't add that now, you're going to have a heck of a time adding that later. So if you ever do a shack design, I say run power for an amplifier, even if you don't want an amplifier. It's so cheap to do it now versus doing it later. And more about how those cables, all those data cables terminate all over the shack. I've got these little patch panels with 8 jacks on them, RJ45s. And they're 8 conductors. They're shielded twisted pair. So they're great for high-speed data and Cat5 to HDMI, whatever you want for that. But it's 8 wires, so you can use them for contact closures and low current, low voltage LEDs, just about anything that you could need wire for. So having all of that, I've used so many of these little ports for different things. They're all mapped out on a chart, so I know where every port goes. And I can use cross connect cables and cross patch things as I need them to do whatever I need. Another little thing that I think all of us say we're going to do someday, but I actually did this day, and that was to make sure that every single outlet and switch in the entire shack, all 3 bays of the garage, is all labeled as to exactly which breaker controls that switch or that outlet. Then you're not flipping off the wrong breaker thinking you're turning off your wall heat, and you're actually turning off your main computer when you least expect it to be turned off. Kind of the same thing in the power panel. The electrician came in and just did chicken scratch writing on all the outlets. I went and verified every one of them. We tested them one outlet at a time to make sure the numbers were correct. And then I just sat down on my computer and made nice, high contrast, easy to read little slips of paper that I then just glued in place in the power panel. They don't have a yellow circle on them, but the 3 red dots, those are the ones I turn off when I go on vacation. So that's a good idea if you live in an area like I do that's out in the country a bit and we have flaky power. Just get those sensitive devices. They're off the grid. If you kill the breaker when you're gone. So my FTDX 101 MP and my computers, they're completely off the grid when I'm gone in case something bad did happen. So just another little tip. So moving on to ground bonding, I've never been a good ground bonding person. In fact, this is the first time I've ever actually done everything I consider right, but I'm now kind of a zealot for it. So my power panel is here. When I put the tower in, each leg of the tower has its own ground rod and is grounded to the tower, and then those grounds then bond into the main garage panel ground. And then the house panel also bonds in, so they are directly connected that way. We have a barn about 500 feet away from the house, and that also has a power panel in it, and that's directly bonded through the conduit to the barn. That's bonded into the main ground system. Then from there's a very large ground that runs out to the operating tables where every single radio chassis actually goes to a grounding bus and are all ground bonded as well. And all the way out to my radio field that is on my 160 meter Marconi, also tied into the full same entire ground network, right up to the roof tower, VHF tower that's up on the roof of the garage. So grounded all the way through, and I can absolutely say that electrical noise is virtually non-existent by doing all of this, because it used to be pretty bad before, and I really attribute it to really doing grounding a lot better than I ever did in the past. This is a view of the grounding straps from N7FP, I think it is. The guy that sells the lightning arrestor panels. They're very inexpensive, and they're behind all of the radios, and every radio there's a wire from the chassis of the radio to the ground strap, which then ties into the master grounding system. Outside is the DXN or the Morgan lightning box. These are the N7F JP FP panel. He builds these panels, and so everything here is bonded as well. The inset photo showing that even from the far right Morgan, it then loops right back to the same grounding as everything else. So everything is completely grounded all the way through, and surge suppressors on the two rotator controls, one for the roof tower and one for the main tower. So this is kind of the last chance in a project like this to really stop and think about, have I forgotten anything? So I would literally go out. It was days, weeks before the sheetrock was going to come. So I would just sit out there with a cup of coffee and think. And sure enough, I did come up with quite a number of things I forgot, and I still had a chance to wire them in. So never assume once the installation's up that you're done. Just think about it. You're probably forgetting something, and it'll be a heck of a lot harder to do later. In comes the man with the 24 inches of blown in cellulose for really, really solid insulation in the attic space, and time for the HVAC. So I was just going to do an in-wall air conditioner and heater. And the builder said, well, if we move some of the dollars around from, the reconstruction and do this instead of that, we can just put you in a nice mini split. And man, super efficient. The electricity expenditure to keep the room at 68 degrees year round is extremely reasonable compared to what I was doing before. So highly recommend if you have the ability. These things are amazing how well they work to regulate your temperature. Next slide's a little controversial only because some people don't like the idea of window bars. They're not legal in sleeping rooms, of course. This is a non-occupied space as far as the code goes. It's not a bedroom. We live in an area where there's quite a bit of drug problems, meth and fentanyl, and they come out into the country to camp in the woods and stuff. So we've actually had meth heads wander onto our 5 acres a time or three. So something to think about. Put bars on the windows. Nobody's going to drag the radios out quite so quickly. And put in some cameras. I'm a strong believer in having everything on video. And if it's a Ring system, I'm just not fond of the Ring system. Where it's all online. But camera systems have gotten extremely inexpensive, and I'm able to view all the cameras on my phone when I travel. I can play back video from my phone. Just pull up an act, if it recorded something that happened, I just hit the button and it plays back what it recorded. So just something to think about if you're doing a shack overhaul. This stuff has gotten very reasonable. I don't recommend using Wi-Fi cameras. There's all kinds of jammers that people can use to jam a Wi-Fi camera, but a hardwired power over Ethernet PoE camera, not so much. Security systems. The one I put in, it was less than $90. I mean, really, really cheap. Uses a $5 a month SIM card that plugs into it that just sends texts to the monitoring center, and it just does what it's supposed to do. It's devilishly difficult to program because the manual is in Chinese. You know how that goes, but I figured it out, watched some YouTubes, and very inexpensive, and it saved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars over what ADT was going to charge us to do it. Another little precaution, if you've got something that has water heater, or in this case, the blue canister is actually the pressure tank for our well, put in water sensors. These were under $25 on Amazon. And if anything leaks in the stuff relating to the thing that generates our water pressure, these things scream bloody murder. And it has actually happened one time, and they did their job. I was very impressed with them. So talk about power strips a little bit. Every power strip that we had in the house was removed, and the places where we do need them, I replaced them with pretty much generic off Amazon, $22 a piece, all metal power strips. So even if something were to happen inside of one that flames out, it can't escape the power strip and repeat the same fire. And so we went through our house, and I'm here to tell you, I've got probably 100 people that have emailed me and said they got rid of all their power strips. These were the ones I pulled out of our house. This is just a sample of them, and cut the cords and throw them in the bin. That way, people won't pull them out and try to use them, because every single one of those is a potential burn down garage, just like mine. Get rid of them. Don't use plastic power strips. They're, use them for short term where you have an eye on them, but don't use them for anything long term or permanent, so to speak. People ask me all the time, what brands do you recommend? I don't really care. I'm a big fan of Surgex. It's extremely high end stuff. I used to be a sales rep for them, but it's very, very expensive. But Trip Light, APC, Juice Goose, Furman, there's all kinds of good brands. Just stay with metal and stay with UL slash ETL listed, and you'll be fine. We're just talking about the fire here, not talking about the level of surge suppression. It's just about the fire protection, and that's all this really is about in this presentation, is not the surge capabilities. It's the fire prevention of not having a plastic container. And this should go without saying, in everybody's house except mine. I didn't have a single fire extinguisher. I had one in the radio room, but I wasn't in there to use it. If I'd been in there, I probably would have, but I wasn't. So we now have lots of them. Got them all over the house. We've got lots and lots of fire extinguishers because there's just no other way to quickly put out a fire without it spreading enormously, especially when you live out in the country like we do. And if you've never used a fire extinguisher, I never had until after the fire. I actually used the one that was in the fire just to see how do they actually work. You can go to places that sell them, and they usually have a test bed out in the back where they'll give you one to blow off and to learn how to use them. And I'd recommend doing that so you know how to use one and how to actually operate it, because in the moment of panic you may not put all that together, and you might miss your chance to prevent a bigger fire. If your budget allows, I have one of these strapped underneath my desk in the radio room. It's Halotron is the modern version of Halon, which was outlawed many years ago, but it's a fire suppression chemical that does not leave any residue. It just sucks up all the oxygen and will put out a fire. So this is for like the expensive amplifier, the expensive transceiver. You see something spark inside of it and smoke is coming out and you think it's on fire. You can shoot it with Halon and it's completely safe and non-destructive for electronics, but only you can decide if $148 is an appropriate price, and they're probably more now. All right, so now it's time to lay out the shack. We've got the space all nice and pretty, and everything is in and done. We've got another blank slate time here, so it's time to just start trimming out everything and putting stuff in. And it was a lot of fun to see what I designed almost a year earlier in software come to fruition and actually be how I designed it. One of the things that I thought of ahead of time is, where's my workbench going to go, which wasn't in the fire. That was down in my barn, and I had never brought it up. So thankfully, I got to keep my beautiful U.S. Navy World War II workbench. But I thought ahead, and this is something that you should think about if you're doing a workbench and you're going to sheetrock. Think about all the outlets and stuff that you might want to go not only to the workbench to get to antennas and your patch bays and power, but also just dropping things down like a dummy load that's going to sit down underneath. So just kind of stuff to think about. Cabinetry over a workbench, it's dirt cheap. I mean, IKEA, you can buy knockdown cabinets that take very little effort to build and install, and that's just stuff that you want to think about in these kinds of projects. Operating tables. There's lots of options for operating tables. An old door over a couple of sawhorses is certainly one way to do it. I wanted to have larger tables that would be able to support the amount of gear that I anticipated replacing. So we were able to find these very reasonably priced at Home Depot. I think they were $179 per table. They're knockdown, build it yourself tables. So we just set up, and my lovely wife Ann and I came in and put them all together ourselves and built them up. File cabinets on the left, we found those used at a used office supply store. So I mean, there's a lot of things you can do if you get creative in searching to find stuff that's reasonably priced and just based on sweat equity to put it together. So we kind of ended up with a big L shape, and had an old dining room table that we decided to put in there so it'd have like a little meeting space in the middle of the shack. Then it came time to start figuring out the risers and the shelves. This was in the middle of COVID, and as we all recall, lumber was stupid expensive, and you had to take what they had. So I had to get real creative to come up with some ideas and to limit the amount of um, uh, trial and error. I decided to use cardboard boxes as stand-ins for wood to come up with dimensions of things and how tall things should be and how far apart, and spacing and all that stuff. So it's just a good idea that if you just come up with something to use as a stand-in before you go spending money on wood and then cutting it and realizing that that wasn't what you thought you were going to do. So that worked out really well. One thing that I didn't really think about in any detail when I was laying it out, I knew I wanted the tables out from the wall by about 24 inches to have that access space behind. But you'll see in a few slides here how really important that became in the completion of the shack. And it's probably the single best idea that popped into my old noggin in building this whole project was that access space. And anybody can do it in a shack. It's just you give up whatever that space behind is, but you gain so much. And I'll show you here in a minute. So here's how the shelves came together. Just 4x4s for supports, and the ones that are in the middle, those are movable. The end ones are attached, but the middle ones can move around. So everything can be moved. You can slide things around and get space and make everything fit like you need it to do. So just by a little pre-planning, able to come up with a shelving design that's custom. It's designed, around what you're going to do with the radios that you have, rather than doing it generically. So again, back to that, lay all that stuff out in software, and it pays dividends when you go to actually put things together. Finishing was super simple, just a can of wood finish and zip zap. That funky, weird strippy wood looks actually really pretty. I kind of like it. And we finished it all off, and then it was all completely assembled, and it's like building a kit. All the pieces were numbered, and once they were all stained, I came back in and just put them all together. So remembering the space that we leave behind, it occurred to me that I'm gonna have a hard time walking behind there with all these cables that drop down from all of the radios. And how am I going to manage that? Walking behind there, I'm going to trip and fall and bust my head open. So it occurred to me one night that, hey, I could build gangplanks. Just take some 12-inch pine boards and some 2x4s, 14-inch long hunks, put them about 24 inches apart on the boards, and that would give me a walking plank that could go behind the operating desks that I could pass cables underneath, and then I could actually walk across the gangplanks. So it ended up just being a complete game changer. And I go behind here almost every single day. There's something I need to change, some wire or radio I want to move or something. If you have the ability to do this, I can't imagine, I can't tell you how important this has been especially in a fairly elaborate shack like this. It's just been an absolute godsend to have the gangplanks. The only kind of downside, I don't use power strips, but I do use UL listed very high quality extension cords that are single hole. So it just makes the cords longer to get to the radios. Oops, there. So that I'm extending those power cords to get out to the 58 outlets. So rather than having power strips, I just have a lot of extension cords, but it works out really well. So then getting to the antenna side of it, couple of patch bays, like I've always done, I just did it a little bit more elaborately. I have what I call the low level patch bay. So, I've got all the different radio options that I can select to 2 different patches that go to the antenna patch panel. And then I put on a lower bay that has um, readily available fused 12-volt power, and can patch. I can put a little QRP rig, a little QRP Labs rig or something, just on the table right in front of the radio, and just patch in and play with a little QRP radio and just patch it in directly, easy peasy. So that was kind of part of the design, was to have easy access for that stuff. The two patch runs that go over the high level patch bay. This is where all the antennas are, and this has all changed since then. I now have very different uh, antenna configurations, but you get the general idea here, where I'm able to take the low level signal, patch it into the amplifier, out of the amplifier into the LP 700 meter, and so on. Ultimately ending up at the antenna. The switches have all been changed to other ones, but I like having a switch available to just do an A/B comparison. Somebody wants to hear what a stepper DB18E performs versus a G5RV, which I still have up in the trees. I can just patch those two into a switch, and we can do an A/B. Now you can hear both antennas and hear the difference that you actually have between them. So I like patch bay based stuff. So if you've never seen that kind of an idea, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email afterwards. I also have a no wall warts policy. Some of the tiniest wall warts can produce S9 noise, S9 plus, very easily. So there are no wall warts other than a couple that have been proven to be very quiet, and they have unique voltages. So I use Pyramid power supplies. They're reasonably priced on Amazon. They are all analog. They're not switching. And it allows me to power up all my devices, including all those little 12-inch monitors, of which I have 5 in the shack. Their power supplies were horridly noisy. They run on 12 volts, so I've actually got a 12 volt, 13.8 to 12 volt converter. I learned the hard way that 13.8 volts will burn out the monitor in about 6 months. Important thing, if you're going to do this stuff, once again, is fuse everything. So I've got little inline automotive fuses for all of the low voltage cables that go out to all the little monitors and all the little MFJ devices, and all the countless things we have in our shacks that run on 13.8 power, that all have fuses on all their cables. The kind of the last consideration, just about wrapped up here, is a consideration of eye level for stuff. We see a lot of these QRZ pages, and nothing against what they're doing. They may have space limitations, but you'll see monitors that are way up high in the sky or at really funky angles. I firmly believe that keeping a line of sight that your eye level as you move from one spot or another in a shack is really important. So a big part of my design criteria and the spacing for all the shelves and the monitors was to put everything that's primary in use at eye level. And anything that's secondary, I don't mind looking up and dealing with something that I only play with a few times a year. So just something to think about for the ergonomics. If you spend a lot of time straining your head looking up, you'd be thankful to have it all be at eye level like that. And lastly, don't skimp on furniture. If you're going to spend a lot of time in a shack, they're not cheap. They're like $400 for a really good office chair, but it makes all the difference in the world if you're like me and you spend a lot of time in the shack and you do contesting and things like that to have good furniture. That was just high on my list. So this is how it ended up looking complete in December of 2021. It's still largely the same. You can see the background on my Zoom picture. It's about the same thing. It's different than this now, but it ended up working really, really well in the end. And I attribute that to all of the planning and spending a lot of time thinking about it and not doing things randomly like I've always done in my entire rest of my life. And these days, ever since then, the only fires that we have in the shack now are on the TV. And I actually put that on a cold, rainy day in the winter. We'll fire up the YouTube fireplace and just make it really cozy out there and dim the lights and play radio. So that's the entire presentation, and my email address is right here. So if you do have any other questions that come to you after the event, you can certainly reach out and shoot me an email and ask your question. So find my mouse pointer here. Where to go? There it is. Stop share.
Well, thank you very much, Dave.
You're very welcome. I hope that wasn't too long. I know it went longer than I said it would because
So,
I got wordy.
uh, it was very informative. Uh, Personally, I got a lot of good ideas, and I'm sure other people did as well. Um, I think we'll move into some questions here. Uh, so I have to walk around with a mic so you can hear the questions,
Okay.
and I
I
want to
have
hold
a
them up
quick
a bit
question, Dave.
fast.
Were you off the air for this whole time?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for when I got the FTDX 101 transceiver, I had it set up in our kitchen in the main house, and I did drag a 50-foot cable out to or a 100-foot cable out to the tower to hook onto the beam, but it was just too awkward to use in the house. So I was off the air for a year, about a year and a half. Not, I'm not. I think you're talking into the microphone, but I'm not hearing anything.
Uh, you touch something there?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Okay, try that. You-
I'm not hearing anything.
Nothing yet.
Dave, I have a question. The uh, power strips that ended up flaming out on you, were they ones that you had laying around because of the for a number of years when
Yep.
you finally had your fire at 2020? Because a number of years ago, these problems with the MOVs and these power strips had already been identified, and most of the newer ones, even the plastic ones, don't have MOVs in them. They've got some
Oh,
other.
no, they do, but it's covered under UL 1449-2, and what the UL said you had to do, you can still use MOVs, but they have to put a flame retardant heat shrink tubing over them.
Okay,
But
the
the
only thing I
thing
mentioned
is,
is
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
because I ran into this in a commercial situation at least 10 years ago where the company that was putting power strips in their products switched to ones that had a different type of device, not an MOV, but it was a surge suppressor.
Sure.
I didn't know if UL had totally outlawed MOVs or
No,
just do
I
what
wish
you
they
said.
would, but no, they haven't. There's a thing called a gas discharge tube is
Yeah,
one.
there's
Uh,
some other one that's a three-letter ETC or something like that. I don't remember the exact component, but they're surge arresters, that they're not.
the thing about MOVs that they are very efficient and they're very cheap. They do a decent job, but they just have those drawbacks.
Yeah.
The reason that I'm a zealot against the plastic power strips is how do you know the plastic power strip that you just grabbed isn't some old one? You don't. And it may be one that's not UL or ETL listed. It's just some Harbor Freight cheap one that doesn't have the stamp, or it's a forged stamp, and it's just a plain old MOV. Why take the risk? I guess that's kind of what I come down to. It's a cheap enough device that the risk aversion is so great to just say no plastic power strips. So, in fact, the US government outlawed all plastic power strips in all of the State Department facilities all around the world because they had an embassy burned down, just like my shack, for the same reason. And you also cannot use MOV based devices of any kind on a cruise ship. They're now outlawed on all cruise ships because cruise ship fires have happened because somebody brings a 20-year-old, 15-year-old power strip on a cruise ship and it does the same thing. So don't take the chance. That's just me preaching because I've been there, done that. Make your own decision.
Next question. Was the power strip that you had that burned up, was it a UL 1449 power strip?
I don't know actually. It was really old. It was from the 90s. The only reason I kept it for so long is it had a 20-foot cord. That's not been legal since like the year 2000. To have you can't have a cord on a standard power strip, that type of power strip that's longer than 6 feet since 1999. This one had like an 18-foot cord on it, and that's why I was using it. But I think the one I have, I think it was ETL listed, which uses the UL standards, but it's not as expensive to get the listing. So ETL is considered equivalent to UL by most authorities. But it was really the fact of age. MOVs degrade over time. Every time they take a surge, the material inside of them is semiconductor, and what actually does the surge suppressing is they conduct that energy from one wire to the other wire, usually to ground or to neutral. And over time, that material degrades. And all it takes is one particularly strong surge and it will ignite. And that's when you get the fire event that was identified in the early 2000s when 1449-2 came out that called for the heat shrink, the flame retardant heat shrink.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? More questions?
Oh, very informative, Dave. Jean Ann and 9VSB here. The question that I have is about insurance, if you don't mind answering. Were you insured through your home insurance, ARRL, or another entity? And are you happy with coverage?
I daily say thank you to State Farm Insurance. They treated us absolutely like gold. It was just under our blanket policy, which for the house and outbuilt, everything all together was like, $349,000, total coverage. So it was more than enough insurance to cover everything. The only thing they required me to do is document every item I claimed, very detailed. My agent came out and he viewed the site, and I said, there's a lot of things in here. I mean, there's thousands of things in here, some that you can hold in your hand that are worth $150 just for like a little sideband filter or CW filter from a radio, those kinds of things, and boxes and boxes of tubes. And he started walking through and looking at this stuff, and so I had to submit every single item as a line item and then provide a reasonable purchase price replacement value for it. And then they assign a percentage of value based on how long you owned it. If it was less than a year, you get 100% replacement value. That's how replacement value insurance works these days. But if it's 30 years old, they're only going to give you 10 or 15% of its value. But it works out very well in the end. I have no complaints. We did extremely well, and I was able to completely rebuild everything except for all the the special things and projects I built when I was a teenager that are all went in the dumpster.
Thank you.
Dave, did you also have ARRL insurance?
No.
Just curious. Other questions?
Anybody on Zoom have questions? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Peter. I have a question.
Yes.
So on your circuit breaker box for that shack, do you use any type of surge protection device?
Well, yeah, we the house was owned by a heavy machinist guy before we bought it. So we have a 600 amp industrial service that they only charge us for what we use. They don't charge the old commercial rate anymore because it's it's not a business being run out of the house anymore. So as part of that, there's a big box about this big that's loaded with really large, super high quality MOVs, and most commercial power installations have those, and they're fine. That's like direct lightning diversion, high static diversion straight to the ground system, and we've got a very large, it's called an OOFR ground. So yeah, we've got massive whole house surge suppression, but that's just by virtue of it having been a commercial service panel before. And there's like 40, I think there's 40 soup cracker sized MOVs. They're about 2 inches square, and they're all in parallel, as if it was one giant MOV, but it's 40 of them.
Do you
whole different kettle of fish.
Does it cover the 3 different types of surges, like EMPs and CMEs and lightning?
No. I mean, again, I don't want to go down all the rabbit holes that some of this stuff can go down. So no, it's just it's just basic surge suppression at that level. I'm not I'm not at the EMP level. So, but we live within minutes of a major Air Force base, Army base. The largest stockpile of nuclear warheads is 25 minutes from my house at the Bangor sub base. So if somebody's going to blow up this area and do an EMP, I don't really care about the Armageddon because I'll be vaporized.
Okay, thanks.
I don't worry too much about EMP.
Okay, I'm not sure if it's my turn. This is a Bill, KDNLQY. You got my attention when you mentioned you had a Surge X, and every ham story is a long story, so I won't go into it. But I just basically had seen somebody using it on QRZ, and it reminded me of a power company I worked with, so I bought it. $300, and I always questioned whether that was a wise investment. So I'm very pleased to see that you had it. What kind did you have? Could you tell me a little bit about your Surge X?
Oh, I've got many of them. I was the sales rep for the company for about 14 years, independent sales rep. And what SurgeX is all about is this Surge basically doesn't leave the box. A SurgeX is a 100% brick wall filter at 60, set at a 60 cycles. So it is a band stop filter. Any frequency beyond 60 cycles cannot pass out, no matter what its energy level. And all surges are high frequency. They're all way, way beyond 60 cycles. They're 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 cycles. They're very high frequency by comparison. So with the SurgeX, if it's not 60 cycles, it doesn't leave the box. And in the case of my FTDX 101NP, I've got what's called a SurgeX Access Elite. And, retail, it's probably a $1,600 surge suppressor. But, it was my rep sample, so I didn't pay anything for it. And I have boxes full of SurgeXs, so I've got them all over the place. But any of the really good surge suppressors these days, they're all good, Juice Goose it's got a funny name, but Juice Goose is a very, very high-end product that doesn't have the high-end price. APC makes really good ones. Just bottom line, if you're spending more than $20 for it, it's probably going to be good enough for what we're talking about, preventing a fire.
Okay, good. Well, anyway, mine has 4 515s on it, so it gives you an idea of how small my ham shack is, and that's pretty much covering all my gear. But
well, if you want an actual model number of one, it's a Sierra Alpha 82, SA 82. It's called a flat pack. And every time I see one show up on eBay, they usually sell for about $75 used. There's no parts in them that can fail, so they're used is fine. And I've got those all over the place. I've got them behind each big screen has an SA82 behind it. All the Heath kits all have SA82s on them, and it just has a duplex out, two outlets on it. That's all it is.
Okay.
But they're cheap and they're full SurgeX technology. They're just rated at 8 amps instead of 20.
Okay. Well, excellent. I don't want to take up all the time, but just briefly, what happened to all the Heath kit? I love my Heath kit. Were you able to restore any of it?
No. What I did was I put it on. I had to keep it all on site, so it all ended up being laid out on a whole mess of folding tables out in my barn. And barn. It's concrete floor and heated, and metal walls and power panels. So it's not like horses and stuff. It's a big building, and I had to keep it on hand because the insurance company technically owned it all. And so once the claim was nearing completion, they reserve the right to come out and decide if they want to claim it and have it professionally restored. So like if I had say a 66 Mustang in the garage, for example, they would have absolutely required that to be kept until the claim closed, and then they would send somebody out to take the Mustang, because that, no matter how damaged, would probably be worth a lot of money, or an old Ferrari or something like that. They declined to take any of it. So I actually, long complicated story I won't tell, but a guy in North Dakota contacted me and he said, I will take all of it with reject nothing, and he paid me a very handsome price for the entire lot. And he brought out a 12-foot, 14-foot truck trailer from North Dakota, and he and his wife spent 2 days loading it all up and took it all away. It was a lot of stuff. And I got a lot of money for it on top of the insurance settlement. So so it's all gone. All 100% gone.
All right. Well, very good. Good presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Well, anything else before we part ways?
I have one question, Dave. Did the Sweet Home 3D software also do the operating table layout?
No, that I just did in Microsoft Publisher.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that in Paint. You could do it in Corel Draw. You know, I just used a graphic software, and then I just downloaded pictures and then sized them because I knew how big a Collins 75A4 was from the specification sheet. So I just came up with a scaled ruler, if you will, in the software, so I could make everything relative to everything else be the right sizes. So, but it was just basic graphic software, nothing fancy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions in the room or on Zoom?
You have to unmute.
Who?
We're muted.
No, you're not muted. I hear
No,
you.
I meant for the people in the room there, Bill.
Oh, okay. Well, Dave, thank you again. Very informative. We certainly appreciated it. And third time was a charm. Thank you.
Well, sorry the first 2 times were so sucky.
Thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome. All right, well, have a good meeting. I'm going to go have a quick dinner and then get on to my next meeting in 25 minutes.
Okay, very good. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the flexibility.